Thank you very much for staying with Biz Check here on KBC Channel 1. My name is Betty Kiptum. Now we want to proceed to our conversation of the second hour. It's matters oil and gas, and we just want to know what are your views on the increasing cost of oil in the country. We want to have a conversation about the oil and gas, the increase in prices of oil and gas. Why is this happening, and what does the future look like? To have this conversation is Mwendia Nyaga. He is the founder of Oil and Energy Service Limited. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Betty.
Right, let's just start with the issues surrounding the cost of oil, and let's start globally. I mean, some things are beyond our control, you know. Let's start with the global trends that are going on right now, starting with the Russia-Ukraine war. Come on.
Thank you. I think even before I go to the Russia-Ukraine war, there's a little bit of background.
Sure.
In that we all watched in 2020 when the price of oil was said to have gone to zero internationally, to $0 per barrel.
Yes.
Of course, that was the effect of the coronavirus. And the coronavirus, what it did was it led to a significant and sudden drop of the oil consumption globally, because people stopped traveling and stayed at home, and flights stopped flying and all that. So since then, the world has then been recovering. Of course, 2020 was almost all down, but in 2021, there were several times when recovery was seen. And so the oil consumption started to increase again. And it started in later 2021. The oil consumption started to go back to the levels where it was in 2019. Now, unfortunately, a lot of production had been withdrawn from the system, especially in the US, because in the US, where they do the shale oil, wells don't produce for too long. You have to keep drilling many wells continuously. Now, when the oil prices fell and the demand also fell, all those rigs were withdrawn and they were parked. They stopped drilling. So oil production in the US went down, and you could not lift it like with a switch. So towards the end of 2021, what we saw was an increase in demand, which was not completely matched by an increase in production. And that was also affected by the action that was being taken by the OPEC, and by extension also the OPEC Plus group, which controlled how to increase the supply during this period of increasing demand. So that already led to a gradual but very sustained increase in oil prices. So by the end of 2021, oil prices were already high. Kenyans did not feel them as much because the government in October took a decision to cushion Kenyans against those prices by using the stabilization fund that had been accumulated over a period of time. Now, come 2021, this trend was expected to continue. And it would have continued as a gradual increase. Of course, it's anyone's guess where it would have ended, but a lot of analysts and experts thought we will be averaging between $80 to $100 a barrel for the rest of 2022 and into 2023 and probably 24. And then now here comes the Russian crisis, where Russia decides to attack or invade Ukraine. When something like that happens, the oil, already the balance between demand and supply was very, very thin. And that was already causing jitters in the market. But I think most people in the industry believe that that balance can be maintained over a period of time as long as there's continued also gradual investment. Now, when this war came, even before the invasion actually happened, the market became very jittery and the prices started to go up. So first is just the imagination of how many barrels would be withdrawn in case some supply routes are closed, and then the oil from Russia will not be able to go to a lot of places in the world. Russia currently, or let me say before the war, Russia was supplying 10% of the world's total oil consumption. and so is Saudi Arabia, and so is US. The three of them, each of them almost supply about 10% of the global oil demand. So imagining that supply from a 10% supplier can be interrupted already pushed the prices high. Now, and then as that was going on, the next bombshell was US to start saying that it is considering stopping the imports from Russia. Now, Russia does not supply a lot of oil to the US. It's basically about less than perhaps 3% of their total consumption today. However, they supply some quality of oil that is needed by the US refineries, and the only alternative source is not a beautiful source for the US, because the alternative sources of that quality of oil is Venezuela, it is Iran, or Saudi Arabia. Now, that already meant that if you withdraw 10% of the US supply, the next source of the quality that is required by the US refineries was also going to be a difficult one. Because Venezuela has the issues it has with the US, has been on sanctions for long. Iran has been on sanctions for long from the US. So they first have to negotiate around those sanctions.
Before they get to the oil supply.
Exactly. And Saudi has not in the recent past been the darling that it has historically been for the US, and has actually been forging friendships and alliances with Russia. So those three sources meant that these withdrawn oil imports into the US are not going to find an easy replacement. And then, of course, if you stopped Russia from exporting oil to the rest of Europe, then that meant you're creating a bigger supply gap, which then means basically the prices can only go high. So they have hit the highest, I think, yesterday. They have been going down today, but again, we don't. That could be just a correction, so we don't know where they will go after that.
Of course, the highest figure there is $135 per barrel.
Yes, that's true for the Brent crude.
Giving us that background, it's very important. But when we talk about the withdrawal of, purchase of oil from Russia by US and maybe even parts of Europe, who are going to be the first casualties of this problem, this crisis?
Well, I was thinking about that and wondering if US and Europe stop buying oil from Russia, because US already made an announcement now. UK has also made an announcement. The European Union has said they are considering, and in fact they have also announced that whatever action they take today, they are working towards weaning themselves out of dependence from the Russian oil and gas supplies by the end of 2022. Now, these economies are quite heavily dependent on oil. I know there's the whole energy transition going on, but today they are still very heavily dependent on oil. I would expect that US and Europe are consuming perhaps upwards of 40% of the total oil consumption in the world. Now, if you withdraw them a major supply like they get from Russia, they have to get this supply from somewhere else. And for your information, Russia today exports only is covering about 7% of the total oil exports. Of course, quite a bit of that is going to the east, to China and the rest. But my expectation would be that they will find an alternative source. That is why President Biden is said to be making calls to Venezuela. Venezuela is supplying China with a lot of oil right now. He's making calls to Saudi, and he's making calls to the United Arab Emirates, and he's also sent an emissary to contact Iran. So if they get oil from these alternative sources, the whole world supply chain of oil will have to rebalance. So the big question is, who is at the bottom of the pyramid as far as the negotiation power is concerned? I don't want to say it's Eastern Africa, but Eastern Africa also has no oil production at oil. There's a little bit in South Sudan, but where is it exported through? It goes to the Red Sea, so it's already in the Middle East by the time it gets into the international supply routes. It's not in East Africa anymore. So there is actually a possibility that for no fault of our own, Eastern Africa could be one of the people who might have to go out begging for supply and taking the breadcrumbs, taking what remains, and perhaps a little bit more of the developing world. I say this because of also the knowledge that the international trading for oil, gas, metals, grains is also quite strongly controlled by Western companies. So it may also be okay to expect that they will ensure that our home is supplied first before we then send the barrels to anywhere else. So the possibility of us struggling not only with high oil prices, but also with limited supplies is actually there. And how that can be handled, I really don't know, but that's really need to be seen as a possible outcome.
Even before the Russia-Ukraine crisis came in, Kenyans were already complaining of high cost of energy. Those are the factors that are beyond our control, but there are some that increase the prices of this oil and gas within our borders, like the taxes and levies, and a lot of conversation has been had about this almost doubling the cost, from the landing cost to what the retail price is. It's almost double. So how is Kenya handling it currently, and what is in the near future? I mean, 14th is not far away. They're going to announce new prices on 14th night. I mean, on 14th, so what is in the offing for Kenya?
Okay, first, again, another step back. And you're right, Kenyans have been complaining a lot about the high cost of energy. And in Kenya, almost, when you mention energy, people think electricity. And this is a discussion that we had most of 2021 about how to reduce the cost of electricity. This debate was entered into back in 2014, and actually some actions set in motion. I may not comment on whether those actions did gain a lot or bring a lot of gains or not, but the whole of last year and perhaps also continuing to happen now is that there's a lot of this discussion, and one of our biggest problems currently is that we are still generating electricity from petroleum. And I brought that up because the same discussion we're having about petroleum is going to come back to bite on the electricity side.
Yes. Because
so far we've not managed to bring our country to a level where, despite having very significant geothermal resources and also the hydropower that has been available for some time, and of course the solar and wind power that has been getting installed quite consistently, I must say. But we've still not been able to wean ourselves out of the generation of electricity from oil. So the price of oil, as it goes up, is going to directly affect the cost of generating electricity for the people. Now, how the government will handle that, I don't know, but I just know that somebody has to pay the bill for that.
And most probably it will be the consumer.
Most probably it will be the consumer because usually when you consume, you pay. And subsidies are not necessarily usually very popular, especially when they appear to be a consistent subsidy. Now, coming back to the price of oil, when from around 2015, the price of oil started to come down globally, and it came down to a level where I think the price at the pump was so good, I could see people on social media saying, I've just filled my car with half the money that I used to spend like back in 2008. 2008 was probably the highest that we had seen before today. I think the government also found an opportunity to do a couple of things. And the two most significant ones that I do know is that there was some doubling of what you call the road maintenance levy. a very important levy because it keeps our roads fixed. And perhaps most Kenyans can say we have less potholes today than we used to have some years ago. But the road maintenance levy was doubled during that time. And then later, the VAT was introduced. And I know there was quite a bit of pushback from consumers on the VAT. And so instead of 16%, we ended up with 8%, but it was still put there anyway. Now, these led to quite a significant increase in how much the taxes and levies amounted to as a contributor to the total price. Now, those taxes and levies are still there. Of course, you do know that once you put the taxes and levies, then the person carrying out the budgeting exercise will budget for them, and it's easier said than done that they can be removed tomorrow. The contribution of the oil taxes and levies to the revenues at Treasury must be something significant. So that continues even when the international oil price increases. And so what Kenyans are likely to see, I can't predict what will happen next week, because I also do know that there's a historical update to how these prices are calculated. It's not the prices of today that affect what is announced as a price change tomorrow. It's somewhat historical. But the government would probably have to dig deeper, much deeper, if it will be able to maintain prices at the level that it has kept them since October last year.
This conversation, very important conversation about the cost of oil and gas, continues in just a little bit. But here in studio, we're having a conversation about the cost of oil and gas in the country, and we're having this conversation with Mwendia Nyaga. He's the founder of Oil and Energy Services. Thank you very much for staying with us. We were talking about the taxes and levies in the country and just how they impact that particular cost of oil. Now, what is the impact of increased cost of oil? Because Kenyans have been posting their shopping lists, their bills online, and just complaining. I mean, with 1,000, this is what I get. With 7,000, this is all I get. So how does the cost of energy translate to the cost of living?
Well, I think the first one I mentioned is there's a direct contribution of oil to the cost of electricity. So first, the cost of generating electricity will obviously go up to the extent that we are going to continue using petroleum for generating the electricity that we need. And so that becomes a direct effect. I don't know, again, how the government intends to handle it, but somebody has to foot the bill. So you either foot the bill on your tab, or maybe pay more taxes somewhere else, or maybe suffer from not having some services. There has to be an effect somehow. But now, on top of that, this is the contribution to petroleum as an enabler of a lot of things that people do. Now, you might have heard, Betty, that last year there was a significant, rather drastic increase in fertilizer prices. I know the people talking out there, they're of course happy to blame the government of the day. But the truth of the matter is that there was, for the second half of last year, some kind of energy crisis in Europe, where the supply of gas, natural gas, which is petroleum, was in short supply. And then they were looking forward to a colder winter than they expected, meaning they needed more natural gas to supply energy during the winter season. And that shortage of natural gas led at some stage to what was said to be 600% increase in the price of natural gas. That, of course, was not felt directly here in Kenya. We don't use natural gas. It's mainly used in other places, but very significant to power generation. And number two, a much higher proportion than anything else, production of fertilizer in the world is actually done from natural gas. The conversion of natural gas to the ammonia and whatever else input that is required in the production of fertilizer. So already the price of fertilizer went up, at least doubled during last year. I'm a tea farmer, so I use fertilizer. I know we could get fertilizer for 2,400 shillings, but today, if you check randomly, you'll get it for between 5,000 and 6,000. It is nothing that anybody has done here in Kenya or not done. It's something that has already happened globally. Now, with what's happening today, what do we expect? The crisis, the natural gas crisis in Europe, will certainly increase. That means Europe is going to continue to need natural gas supply from many other sources other than Russia. In fact, Germany has been complaining that the pipe is pumping backwards. The pipe from Russia, instead of pumping gas to the west, it is now pumping to the east. And whereas there is not a significant connection of a piped natural gas supply between Russia and China, it is also known that quite a bit of the gas is now starting to go to the Southeast Asia. Now that will lead to continued increase in prices of natural gas, and that contributes to many things, mainly fertilizer and many other things that are produced in petrochemical plants. I'm sure what you're wearing there today, what I'm wearing here today, has some contribution from petroleum. So there. But now coming back here, of course, we are using vehicles for transport. Borders for transport. Industries are needing energy. They will either use electricity or they are using petroleum directly. So this is a significant input to the cost of production. It is then generally acceptable to expect that prices of everything will go up. Now, this will include food. And thinking about food specifically is that first, the price of fertilizer has not just gone up, it has been high, and it will continue to go up. What happens to the farmer?
The CS of Agriculture said that if subsidies are not provided by Treasury, it will hit around 7,000 shillings.
You see? You see? And even 7,000 could be another statement, depending on how this crisis in Eastern Europe evolves. Now, farmers will first practically be unable to buy the fertilizer. Those who buy will put it in their costing. But perhaps we better worry about those who don't buy first, because what's going to happen? Their production will reduce.
Will go down,
When their production reduces, then there'll be generally a reduced supply of food. I don't want to say there will be shortage, but simple laws of demand and supply, they dictate that when demand remains high and supply goes down, the prices are going to go up. So I think Kenyans also need to brace for increasing prices of food. I know we like to blame a lot of people when these kind of things happen, but whatever is happening globally today will almost certainly lead to an increase in the prices of food locally.
Right, which is quite unfortunate, really. I mean, Kenyans were just coming out of the impact of the pandemic and trying to regain their footing, and then this happens.
I know. It's sometimes people say that's how life is. You know, you almost move from one crisis to another, but the pandemic was a major crisis, has affected people very negatively, the businesses. And now you come to this. I think the crisis of Russia and Ukraine will affect people in very, very many ways. It doesn't matter whether you park your car at home. It doesn't matter whether you work from home and are not traveling a lot. But we have to brace ourselves.
Brace for tough times. The manufacturing sector in Kenya, I mean, it has been complaining for the longest time about the high cost of energy, which impacts the production cost, and eventually the cost is passed to our goods, making most of Kenya's locally produced goods uncompetitive in the regional or even global market. So in this crisis, I mean, we were already struggling to make our products competitive. What happens now that we are being hit harder?
Well, a bit of reprieve is that whatever is happening globally will affect everybody.
Yes.
However, we also do know that we are competing perhaps with others who may have perhaps more stable, say, power generation environment. when we talk of countries like Europe, Europe has quite a bit of locally produced natural gas, for example. But just like we have said about the people, I think the industries will also have to face the same effect. I'm also in the logistics industry, and one of the things that we have to think about, I mean, today, the diesel would contribute about 50 to 60% of the cost of transportation of commodities across the country in Kenya, whether that commodity is sugar, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's maize or wheat, whatever is being transported around, name it. Now, if this cost goes up, what's then going to happen? The cost of transportation will go up. So what's going to happen to the, say, even like the retailers, they'll have to also have to pump up the prices. The manufacturers have to bring in the inputs to their factories. So they will pay higher for petroleum, and they will pay higher for energy, unless, like I said earlier, the government is able to subsidize. How much it is able to subsidize is probably not in my domain to discuss, but I do know that when you have a limited pass, you also have limited options on how you can actually spend it. So the manufacturers will have to also bear higher costs of manufacturing, which means they'll have to increase prices, which might mean to a certain extent they continue or they get more uncompetitive, but they can take reprieve in that the global happenings are affecting even their competition. Yeah.
When we look at the issues of supply now, Africa has quite some oil deposits, you know, and produces a lot. But over the years, it has been viewed as a curse to the countries that these deposits are found in, as opposed to being a blessing. How can Africa move from that position to somehow cushioning itself from such kind of crisis?
Again, I will set just a little bit of context.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's important.
In that, at some stage, Africa was producing approximately, again, 10% of the total world oil supply, and consuming a very, very small proportion out of that. Most of it gets exported. But some events which are almost unexplained, we have seen reduction in production across a number of major producers. Now in West Africa, Angola and Nigeria have been major suppliers of oil, producers of oil. At some point, Nigeria was producing upwards of 2 million barrels of oil per day, and Angola was producing upwards of 1.5 million barrels per day. These countries have faced continued reduction in production, and they have also continued to face continued reduction in investment for future production. Now, perhaps the case that is clear on what happened is Libya. Because Libya, arising from the, I think, happenings of 2011 or somewhere out there, the ousting of President Gaddafi, and Russia has been in crisis since then. A country that was producing, I think, 2.5 million barrels per day is today producing 500,000 barrels per day. Other large producers like Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia have been less affected. But these three have been main producers of oil. The others I've mentioned are more of gas producers than actually oil producers. So we are having Africa in a state right now where it's producing so much less oil than it has historically produced, and has also had so much less investment for future production than has actually happened.
Okay.
Now, you would hope that this would be a time to revamp all this. But unfortunately, funding is now a problem for oil production because of the energy transition that is taking place. So I've even seen it being argued somewhere else, and thanks to Africa Energy Chamber, which has been advocating for Africa to consider setting up financing facilities for oil producing facilities, because financing from a lot of bilateral funders outside Africa is now becoming very, very limited. But Africa has perhaps the largest stock of unproduced and sometimes also undiscovered resources. Like Eastern Africa probably has quite a significant stock of undiscovered resources, and those which have been discovered have not been produced. Mozambique produces a trickle of gas, but if you look at how much they have discovered and are not producing today, is some kind of world-class reserves. Tanzania, the same, has large gas discoveries. It's not producing most of it. It's producing just a small volume for local use in power generation and some other industrial activities. The story about Kenya, I'm sure you know, we were about to start producing, but we still are not there. Uganda, same case. Uganda discovered oil a long time ago, but it's not producing. DRC prides itself to potentially having the largest volume of undiscovered oil in their internal basins in DRC. I mentioned DRC because we border with it just here in Eastern Africa.
They're about to join the EAC.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing. It's a big country with a big population. So I think again it will be a wake-up call for Africa on for how long will our continent be an owner and producer of raw materials and so many other natural resources, but yet continue to suffer in times of global crisis like this. We can't really make use of the resources that we have. So it's kind of a wake-up call, and everyone has to think that if I'm not going to get support globally to increase production for those who already have production, or to develop production for those who would like to develop, then what else should we do? Perhaps Africa again needs to think as a group.
I mean, there have been quite some eye-opening moments for Africa in the recent past. COVID did the same thing with the manufacturing sector, you know, the overdependence on imports. Just looking internally and seeing what the local manufacturing sector can do. Maybe that is something that the oil production sector can also do. What will it take?
It takes policy, it takes skills, and money. Why do I say policy? Is because sometimes when you have policy support for some certain projects, for example, you've seen President Museveni in Uganda almost bend over backwards to get the oil project going. And at some point, he had to convince the leadership in the country to forego very significant amounts of taxes that they were demanding from the oil companies, so that the oil companies can be left free to go to the next stage of development. It is almost clear that that is going on now and working. Of course, Uganda has been working with Tanzania a lot, and the president in Uganda also taking the lead to negotiate with Tanzania about the pipeline. I think in all countries, the policy direction and the governments deciding to take some level of charge to get this going is important. Again, we've seen it in Tanzania when President Suluhu Hassan took over. The gas project was considered dead. In fact, Norway, a company in Norway, wrote off $900 million from their balance sheet. And that was money invested in Tanzania. And they said, we can't see this project going on. We are going to write these off. We'll wait and see what happens in future. Now, the current president in Tanzania led the government team and perhaps instructed them to reach out to those companies and say the Tanzania government wants to talk to them again. Now it's looking like it's coming back on course. It's looking like it's coming back on course. Now, what has stopped the gas development in Mozambique is I can't even call it civil war. because it's something much smaller than that. But there's some insurgents somewhere towards the neighbor of Tanzania who have made it very difficult for the oil companies to operate, to build a project that would, as at last year, have been the largest foreign direct investment in a single project in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.